What's up YouTube, Dart here from Zephyr War Games, and as our first DarkWorld profile of 2023, I'm actually super excited to be bringing you this, guys. So this is the Fabled Raven Synchro version, but we are now involving the Bystials. So one thing that I've been doing with a lot of testing with this deck is I was kind of like, well, I kind of want a hand trap, but what hand trap is the most effective in the current format? And the answer was Bystials. But then I kind of had the thought of, well, if I'm constantly activating dangers, I'm constantly losing my Bystials. So how do I make it better? Well, the best thing about this is it has very nice synergy with Fabled Raven, with all the other cards as well, and then the Bystials are just additional levels that can help you either go into synchro plays, or they can actually help you disrupt your opponent. So, with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content for this entire year. With all of that out of the way, we're going to dive headfirst into the profile, and I'll explain everything as I've got it and why I've got it that way. So we start off with, of course, triple Fabled Raven. Now, the reason we are playing 3 of this is the only normal summon of the deck that you want to be normal summoning. Obviously, everything else can be tribute summoned and stuff like that. But what Fabled Raven brings to this deck is it gives you the ability to constantly trigger your DarkWorld effects. Now, obviously, not the secondary effects, but it will allow you to trigger their first effects. There's consistent ways of getting them out of the hand. On the flip side, what makes this a little bit risky is that this is a massive Achilles heel of the deck. If this gets impermed or veiled, it can really hurt it because it doesn't discard a cost or anything like that. So it's a double-edged sword. However, if it does resolve, or that's where the Bystials come in to bait out specific hand traps, it does then give you the ability to unload stuff like your snows and mainly your rainbows, or if you're going to be trying to go for a hand leap or anything like that, your ceruli, in order to kind of trigger additional effects, consistently hand loop your opponent. You can put a gold in here if you want to be popping your opponent's cards, and it does work out very nicely. I was looking at actually playing Brainwashing in this deck as well, because if you control it correctly, and with the Bystial Magnamooch triggering in the end phase, you're constantly always going to have 3 cards in your hand if played correctly. And unlike the dangers where you're going to burn through unnecessary resource, you're actually controlling exactly what you discard and when you discard it. So being able to play something like Brainwashing was a lot more consistent, but I tried to keep the deck as a low count as I possibly could. So if you can find space for it or you want to adapt to yourself, by all means, please do so. Then, of course, the standard of this one, this never changes. In all of my DarkWorld decks, this was the first time that I was kind of like, well, do I put Grepher at 2? And the only reason that I would have been putting it Grepher at 2 is because through the Bystials, you can actually recycle your banished Greffers. But then I was like, you know, at the end of the day, I really need the Greffers. In order to complete to get to your fuse, you need to see Grepher plus the fusion spell. And obviously you've got ways of getting to Grepher, you've got ways of getting to the fusion spell, but you can't always guarantee you're going to have both to trigger. Now, obviously, a great combo would be Fabled Raven plus Snow plus Rainbow, and that just goes ham, because then what you do is you go Fabled Raven, discard Snow, discard Rainbow. That will then give you your Grepher. That will then also give you your Fusion Spell. You can then activate the Fusion Spell to discard the Grepher, banish the Snow from the graveyard, and then summon out your Dragon. Other from that point there, that's kind of where you want to Genta to the board, because then you just go, cool, Genta back to the hand for Rainbow, Rainbow back to the hand for Grepher, and you're good to rock and roll. And then off the back of that, you'd then be left with a Grepher and a level 4 Fabled Raven, which can be a little bit of an issue sometimes, otherwise you just link them off and then go again. Then the last of the DarkWorld cards, we are playing 2 silver and the 1 ceruli. I think ceruli is at 1 is perfectly fine. Like, you don't want to clog on it too much. Yes, it's not a hard once per turn, but you're still giving your opponent a monster, and you still need to make sure that whatever you are discarding from your hand, you're going to get maximum value from it. So what I mean by that is, off the ceruli, I don't want to discard Genta. I don't want to be discarding Snow, because at this moment in time, my opponent's not going to have anything in the graveyard for me to gain an effect. I don't mind discarding a Grepher, because then I can look at my opponent's hand, plus I can pop the ceruli. I don't mind ditching the silver, because then they lose 2 cards in their hand. And I don't mind doing the rainbow, because then I'll be able to special summon 1 from the deck. So there are ways to kind of play around it if you want to, but it's not heavily reliant on the ceruli. You could go back to the previous ratio that I had, which was 1 silver and 1 gold, or you can cut silver down to 1 if you want to. But the idea is I want to be able to silver during my turn and then silver during my opponent's turn as well. So 1 off of ceruli, 1 off of the fusion monster, and ultimately leave my opponent with next to nothing. On top of that as well, it does mean that if I use the Fabled Raven and Fabled Raven discards Snow, Rainbow and Silver, not only will Silver come back to the board, it will make Fabled Raven a 5, so I've got an instant Synchro level 10 there, which can be very useful, and kind of move it from there. Then for the other monsters that are kind of being used as utility cards, we've got free Fenrir. The reason Fenrir is actually really good is you can special Fenrir. So Fenrir plus Fabled Raven is a Baron de Fleur straight away for you. So you special summon out Fenrir, use Fenrir's effect to search out another copy of itself. You normal summon Fabled Raven, Fabled Raven's effect to discard that Fenrir you've just searched, and then you can sync the two into a Baron. Now, obviously, that's up to you if you want to upgrade your Fenrir to a Baron, which personally I would do. But then the idea is that everything off of that as well, you're going to get additional pluses. And it does mean that by replacing itself, your Fabled Raven has more discard fodder if you want to adapt its level to a higher status. And then the last two cards we are playing is 2 Catalyzer. I'm considering actually putting this card at 3 because we don't play Dangers as heavily. But the idea is that you've got 5 targets that are going to basically be your pseudo Dangers to be able to kind of discard your DarkWorlds to trigger their effects and keep the rotation going. Obviously, the Catalyzer can then adapt levels as well. So if you open up, what I mean by that is if you open up like a Catalyzer and a level 8, 5, anything like that, you have ways of getting different levels to the board. And by getting those different levels to the board, you then have adaptation in order to kind of make whatever you need and whatever kind of really extends your plays to the max level and the max potential. Because you can either bring the level 4 on board and that will unlock rank 4 plays for you, or of course you can bring on a level 8 on board and that can unlock level 10 Synchro plays for you. You have so many different options. Like I've even got like a host of additional Synchro cards to the side as well that I'll show you that can also be considered that didn't even make the cut just because I wanted to show you as many options as possible. So that's it for like the DarkWorld engine and of course just the general utility cards of the Fenrir and everything else. Moving on to the Bystials themselves. Now, the Bystial lineup, I've gone with 2 Lubellion, purely because I only own 2 Lubellion. I think 2 is kind of enough. Maybe you want 3, because unlike in a version like Branded, where you've got technically 6 ways of getting this to the graveyard, this one you do actually want to open, because you want to be able to discard it. By discarding it, you're going to get into Lubellion, and then moving on from there as well. So we've got 2 Druid Swarm, the 1 Sorinir, and then of course the 1 Regained, which is how you recycle your Greffers, which is really, really cool, and the 1 Beast. Now, I really like this engine. I think it's incredibly powerful. I've tried to stay away from it because obviously everyone and their mum is playing this, and I highly expect, I would not be surprised if we see something like Druid Swarm or Magnum maybe getting hit in the future. But as it stands right now, what this gives you is it gives you the ability that if you go second, you still have options to be able to disrupt your opponent, search out the Lubellion should you need it. You'll put in presence on the board turn 0, which is very, very important because like I've said before, if you were to open up, let's say you've opened up Fabled Raven and Magnamute, and then you've got 3 other random cards. You activate Magnamute, quite like when we were using Fairy Tail Luna, quite like when we use Fenrir, it replaces itself. It will then be able to search you out a Druid Swarm, it will be able to search you out a Lubellion, everything like that. So then what you do is in the end phase, you've replenished your hand, you draw, you've got your 6 cards. You can then normal summon down your Raven. You can then, technically off the Raven, discard the card you searched off of Magnamute and discard the card you drew for turn. And straight away, that gives you a level 10 Synchro, so that's your Baron de Fleur. Now, obviously, going second is a little bit more risky using something like Fabled Raven because it means your opponent is probably more consistently going to put interruptions on the board. So it's something you need to kind of keep in mind with that, but that's where you kind of then need to use Magnamute or your Druid Swarm to kind of kill that opponent's monster or any threat that your opponent has on the board. Yes, you will lose your battle phase, but then you're able to set up your own board, which ultimately will then lead you to pretty much an OTK victory. On top of that as well, when you start looking at other alternative cards, especially if you're worried about a Bystial like matchup, is you can look at something like Crimson Blader. And why this works so well is just normal summoning Fabled Raven, not even using its effect, plus like any of the Bystials, can then sync into a Crimson Blader. You then destroy something, and then your opponent cannot special or normal level 5 or higher monsters. So it means that high level decks like this are just completely locked out, which is really, really cool. So it does kind of give you an option. Yes, they can still summon the Bystials during your turn, but ultimately you're stopping them flooding the board with boss monsters to play through. With the remainder of the spells, again, all of this is very straightforward. You've got Allure of Darknesses, you've got more targets for the Allures, but you don't really want to be banishing in these. But you do have Regained as well, which can help you out massively. So this is one you're probably going to want to go to a little bit earlier than Beast. Double Gates, standing on that one. Double Ascension, double Talent Steal, and the 1 Archives. The Talents is questionable. If I wanted to cut this deck down to a complete 40, it's one that you could consider. But again, depending on the matchup, there's a lot of cards that are interaction during your turn. You do have to be very, very careful of. And then the best thing about Bystials is if you're against a Thunder matchup, ultimately you could just go, all right, you know what, I'm going to take all of this out. And then I've got a very easy 10-card engine, give or take. to side in additional cards that may help me in the Flunder matchup. So stuff like Imperm, Skill Drains, everything else like that, you name it. So the spells are always pretty staple, quite like the 12 DarkWorlds that I always profile. So the free Rainbow, the free Grepher, the free Genta, and the free Snow as well. So moving on to the extra deck, so we'll go through the Link monsters because these are all pretty straightforward on that one. So your Appaloosa, your Saruja, so you've got your Extender. Keeping in mind that this can also extend your Bystials and put dead cards back into the deck. You've also got your Appaloosa, which is your out-and-out Negator. The Zelantis with, of course, the Muckracker kind of combo or the lockout. So someone said to me that they didn't quite understand how this works. So the way this works is you summon Zelantis first by any means, just whether you get 4 monsters. Ideally what you're trying to do is if you've got 4 monsters, you're probably going to go Saruja first. And then you turn Saruja into Zelantis. And then you get 2 more monsters, you make Muckracker. And then you use Muckracker's effect to discard a card, revive a fiend, locking you into fiends. Then you use Zelantis' effect to banish the entire board of all monsters, and then you can only bring back fiends. Because Zelantis is making you, as the player locked into fiends, special summon back those monsters, if your opponent is not playing fiends, you cannot special summon those fiends back to the board, whether it's coming to your board or theirs. So that's how you kind of wipe their board completely, and then the idea is that off of Muckracker, or hopefully you've got more fiends on the board, that you then go into something like Daguerreo's to double an attack. You can then use the fusion play. You can bounce back Greffers and everything else that you need to. I've still maintained the Underworld Goddess. I've also maintained IP with Unicorn. Now, obviously, these are just on the facts is that sometimes you might not get to a Fabled Raven, or sometimes you'll get to a Fabled Raven where you want to discard more cards than you actually need to make a Synchro play. And that's where you can then kind of utilize this to the max potential and then build off the back of that. So I'll save the Synchros for last because to the XYZs, we've still got your Baguska and the Daguerreos. Now keep in mind, if you were to bump up your Fabled Raven to a level 4, and one of the best ways to consistently do that if you want to go down that route is to play Beige in the deck, because then Fabled Raven, discard Beige and one other DarkWorld gives you an instant level 8 Synchro play or an instant rank 4 play. So that's a very cool combo. You just need to be playing Beige to do it. But the idea is that Fabled Raven can also help to make your XYZs. You've got the one where you're stuck under Shifter, you're stuck under something else that you need to be going for a Baguska, and then you've got the Daguerreos, which can either double an attack for a hit and OTK, draw you through cards, or of course can also revive from the graveyard. So it gives you a couple of alternative options there as well. Then the 2 Grapha Dragons, I always keep this the same. I've kind of felt a little bit one time that I wanted to cut this to 1, but then I just go, nah, you're crazy. You're going to want to summon this more than once sometimes as well. And then for the Synchros that I opted to go for is I went with a very aggressive lineup of the Berserker the Tenyi alongside a Stellar Windwolf. So a lot of you might be like, whoa, what the hell is this card? I've never seen this before. So this is a card that came out in Dharma. So relatively a while ago actually now. So technically last year. But basically it's a level 9 Synchro. And the reason I thought this was really cool is Fabled Raven, discard 1 card with a Bystial, gets you into this. And then the way this card works is, I'll read it specific for you. It's 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuners. You can only control 1 Stellar Wind Wolf Fright once per turn. Sorry, just 1 in general. It gains 300 attack for each time another monster's effect is activated. While this card has 4,000 or less attack. So once it gets to 4,000, that's it, you stop. Once per turn, if this card attack is 4,000 life points or higher, quick effect, you can shuffle both this card and all monsters your opponent controls into the deck. So all you need to do, I believe it's 5. So 5 monster effects gets this up to 4k. Once this hits 4k, that's where the damage really starts to happen. And the reason that's so damaging to do is technically by activating a Bystial in hand, that's activating an effect. If you're able to then extend additional effects, so you discard more cards, you activate a Salamander Catalyzer, that's 1 effect. You activate the effect of the DarkWorld in the graveyard, that's a 2nd effect. So straight away, when you've made this, you've already got 2 effects triggering and being able to go additional further. Not to mention, for example, if it was Snow, you'll then be able to get the effect of Archives, anything like that to able to trigger more effects. Now, it will be a little bit more consistent if you were to add dangers to the board, because then you go, okay, well, make the wolf early doors, and then you start activating the dangers, and then straight away you've got a 4k boss monster that's going to be able to completely shuffle your opponent's entire board. So it is definitely a really cool option to play around with. It's not a staple. This was just one of these cards that I was like, I haven't seen this card being used for a while. I know why. It's just not as consistently doable. But in a deck like this, especially if you add in dangers, like I said, it's just a lot more consistent. If you really don't want to play this, you've got loads of other options, like you've got Borrowed Savage that can be an option. So these are some of the other options that I haven't actually put in, but there are ways that you can look at them as well. So Psychic End Punisher, just for those one times if you're going second and your opponent deals damage to you or you've burnt you or anything like that, you've got a route into that. You've got Scarlight as a win con in time because you can put multiple monsters on the board and then Scarlight can just nuke them and then burn your opponent. Obviously Omega to recycle your banished cards, rip from your opponent's hand, so that will then be help to utilize the hand loop because you can then silver your opponent, rip 2. Technically, if you talents them as well, you'll rip another one, leaving them with 2 cards, one for their starting turn to play with. You can then Omega to leave them with only 2 cards in the hand, and then that's where you can silver again to complete the hand loop. Crimson Blader that I mentioned before as well. So they're just a couple of alternative options should you want to look at them. I probably could have put the Stellar Wolf into that one, but I was like, you know what, Stellar Wolf is actually really cool if you get the right cards to trigger its effects. Not to mention, if you get it onto 37 and then you trigger the Grapha Dragon, so you trigger the Grapha Dragon, discard a card, you're triggering 2 more effects there as well, which is really nice. And then, of course, the level 10s, you got your Sovereign, and then of course the Baron. So Baron is pretty straightforward and simple on that one. This is one of the ones where if you don't have Baron yet, because we haven't got the Maze of Memories reprints, you can look at one of the other alternatives. Even Savage Dragon as an early door option to give you that negate for anything like a Nibiru or possible additional hand trap. And then the Sovereign is just because you're going to be banishing with your own Bystials. You can banish your opponent's stuff, you banish your stuff, doesn't really matter. And then he just gets stronger and your opponent's stuff gets weaker. And then when you're already playing with big boss monsters anyway from your main deck in Rainbow and Grepher, being able to have a boss monster on here that actually reduces all your opponent's monsters as well is insane. And it just gives you that one punch OTK capability even more so. You do need to be very careful because none of these are actually fiends. So if you do go for the World Sea option, it will completely loop them or get rid of them. But again, that's kind of one of the ones where you don't want to be doing that loop unless you absolutely have to. And it's also one of the ones that very few people are aware of. Unless they've played DarkWorld themselves or have seen a DarkWorld video, they're unaware of this kind of like board wipe. And it's very, very good and very, very powerful. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty much it for this version of the deck. I really do actually enjoy this version quite a lot. Also, just the fact of involving Fabled Raven is really kind of cool, very fun. Just a little bit more unique and a little bit different. Now, I know obviously Fabled Raven came with a structure deck, so it's not like, oh my god, you thought something so far out of the box. But when you combine the Fabled Raven with the right synchros and the right kind of like playstyle, depending on the local environment as well, you can get some really, really cool outcomes and options, which I thoroughly enjoy, and it's really cool to kind of see. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you continue to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss out on anything for the entire year and join us on our journey of 2023. We are still building and pushing for that 100,000 subscriber mark. I know it seems like a far way off, but you know, we have goals and this is what we want to try and hit with this, as well as providing as much fully entertainable Yu-Gi-Oh content for you guys and as informative as possible so that you can be as creative as well and put different styles of decks together, especially DarkWorld right now, which you guys are absolutely loving, and I'm having a huge amount of fun playing as well. But for now, as absolutely always, guys, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling.